I think so,
Okay,
yeah.
perfect. Well, I finally have a female on the podcast
Yes.
after
Our Twitter beef?
yeah, Twitter
No.
beef, and I got some abuse online, and my mom may have also stepped in and said, "It's time to have a female." I was like, "All right, fine."
Good. I'm honored to be the first.
Yeah, but thanks for coming. Thanks for doing this.
Yeah.
Let's start by this. Just tell us kind of generally what area you specialize in and what field in sports science you work in.
Sure. Yeah. I'm doing research on early specialization is kind of my passion. So that's looking at children's sport participation and kind of what are the negatives and positives and what are they kind of doing in sport.
Right. It's like the benefits and dangers of specialization compared to diversifying, right? Or maybe sampling?
Multi-sport. Yeah, it's
Right.
got different names, sampling, multi-sport participation. There's no kind of clear definition,
Right.
but just, the opposite.
True. So like what is specialization for people listening who may not know what that is? Like, of course, we have an idea of, a specialization is you only play one sport and that's it. But
Yeah.
is there more to it?
There's definitely more to it. There's not really a consistent definition of early specialization. Kind of depends on basically what research study you're looking at. The kind of more consensus definition is more than 8 months of year at the exclusion of other sports and participating in only one, focusing all your energy.
Like for the
on
most
one
part of the
sport.
year, you're only
Playing one sport. Yeah.
Right.
For the majority of the year. Yeah. You're focusing on one sport, and lots of them include the definition of exclusion of other sports. So you not only you're only playing one, but you've decided to not play other sports intentionally.
So like, why is this area so controversial? Like, why is there so much beef going on around specialization?
So I can't really answer the why, but for some reason, people have just kind of latched onto this idea that early specialization is a terrible thing for children and should be avoided at all costs. And kind of the issue around that is people don't even know what early specialization is. Like I gave one of the definitions, 8 months per year, but if you're talking to like parents, they're just like, oh, my kid just can't play one sport. They have to play more than one sport. And it's so much more nuanced and complicated than that.
Right. So it's not that early specialization is bad or not. Like, it's not like we know that for sure just yet. But
Not really,
it's just that
no.
we can't say, like, if I play one sport only, but I only play like pickup soccer,
Yeah.
am I specializing? No. But if another kid is playing 8 months a year training every day,
Right.
he is specialization.
Yeah.
Right.
You would argue that lots of the current research out there doesn't really make that differentiation, which is a problem. It doesn't look at, intensity of training or just sheer volume of training. And I think that's kind of what's inferred and what's wrong with early specialization is that you're training too much. And so you're at risk of injury or burnout or dropout. But when you actually look at how people are measuring early specialization, very few definitions actually look at the intensity or just sheer volume of training. So like you said, you have kids who are participating, recreationally in soccer 2 times a week, being classified as early specializers, the same as a kid who's training, 10 hours a week in the same sport. So.
Right. So the problem happens is when they're conducting those studies and they lump everyone together.
Right.
And they don't make that differentiation between the different types of participation, right? But then we go ahead and we interpret our findings to people, and then people take it, as if every kid who's specializing in sport is gonna have, injuries or gonna burn out or
exactly. And I think the media, especially, has kind of latched on to this idea that early specialization is just awful for you, and they've relayed that message to parents, and so. I think of, like, I play on a women's basketball league, so lots of the people are parents, and they'll find out what I do, and they'll be like, oh, that's great. I heard early specialization is so bad, so I have my kid in, 5 different sports.
Right.
And it's really hard. I don't want to get into it with them, obviously, so I'm like, oh, that's good. But part of me is thinking, why is playing 5 sports at a high intensity any better than playing 1 sport at a high intensity?
Right. So it's not like they're putting their kids in multiple sports, but they're also telling them, like, hey, have fun and enjoy it. It's like, no, you're
going to be
putting you
elite.
in 5 sports so that out of the 5, maybe you'll make it in 1.
Exactly.
And so what's the point, really?
Exactly. And I think it's, if not just as harmful, more harmful, who knows, to be doing that, especially when we don't really understand which aspects of early specialization are the problem. And then, so I think we've kind of swung too far where a few studies said, early specialization leads to injury and it could lead to burnout and dropout. And then people latched onto that and they went, okay, so if I don't want that to happen to my child, I just have to put them in as many sports as they possibly can, and completely missed the mark.
Right. Okay, well, let's unpack a little bit, like what kind of harmful aspects there are to early specialization. So, for example, injuries, right?
Yep.
There's been quite a few studies showing that early specialization can lead to injuries, right?
Right, yeah.
Right.
So this would be overuse injuries. It's not necessarily like accidental injuries. People have injuries all the time. This is overuse injuries. So they're saying that you're overworking certain joints or muscles, and then that's causing the injuries. But I think you could argue that's volume and intensity of training, not necessarily early specialization. That's just doing something too much. And my dad is a high-level coach. He's coached a women's Olympic volleyball team, and so we've had discussions about this many a time. And so he argues that like those overuse injuries, that's not early specialization, that's just poor training. And that if you have a good coach who kind of understands the human body and understands things like that, you can easily train 5 times a week without causing overuse injuries, and it's strictly just kind of like training properly. So there's an argument for that.
Like the injury argument, I kind of get both sides of it a little bit, because if you're not increasing your range of motion, you're not exercising and putting to use multiple joints and parts of your body, then I guess that stress will be concentrated on one part, and then over time that will hurt it. But then the question is that the fault of only playing one sport, or is that because you're training in that one sport in a wrong way?
Right. Exactly.
So yeah, I mean, it's definitely more complicated than just saying you only play one sport, therefore you're gonna get injured. Right. What other like psychological impacts does early specialization have? And I'm only bringing up these kind of harmful consequences because there's recently an article in the Vancouver Sun, and we're talking about it, called. And this is so over the top. It's called Fear, Greed, Broken Dreams. How early sports specialization is eroding youth sports. Like, relax. Like, they're not dying.
Yeah.
Like, they're fine.
Exactly.
The kids are good.
Yeah.
But they're still making it out to be some it's like Bird Box or something like that.
Yeah.
So what is going on? What kind of harmful emotional consequences there are?
So that's the thing. They don't really have a ton of research on this. There's some studies that have suggested, so there's one study that has suggested it could lead to dropout, but that wasn't looking at early specialization in particular. They just looked at kind of sport participation patterns, and they found that those who participated in dryland training sooner and kind of like year-round training sooner were more likely to drop out than those who did not. But that's not early specialization
what do you mean,
necessarily.
Like dryland?
So this was in swimmers.
Okay.
So dryland training was, like strength training, endurance training outside of the pool. And so those who engaged in that earlier were more likely to drop out. Well, that's not anywhere in the definition of early specialization necessarily.
Right.
So you could argue, like, is there really a direct link there, or is it just kind of? And I mean, the authors are my supervisor, Dr. Jessica Fraser Thomas, and she said, I never said that. Like, people completely took it out of context and said early specialization leads to dropout, and she'll be the first one to say, like, that I didn't really look at early specialization, and we just said it may, like, the pathway that they followed could potentially lead to, but there was no guaranteed that this was a link, and people kind of jumped on that. There's also a study looking at burnout, so that's not necessarily stopping the sport, but like kind of losing your passion in the sport, I would say. And it was the same type of thing. They were specifically looking at early specialization, but they just found that they had higher levels of emotional exhaustion. There's a lot more to burnout than just emotional exhaustion, but people kind of jumped on that one sentence, and suddenly every paper is citing that early specialization leads to dropout and burnout.
Right. I mean, yeah, people, and like myself included, I think we're all guilty of it, is kind of we pick and choose what fits our narrative and we stick to it.
Yep.
But at the same time, we have to call people out on it, and not even call ourselves out on it when we do it, because I'm sure we've all been guilty of it.
For sure.
But yeah, so the problem is pretty clear. It's not like we can define what early specialization is just yet. And it's not like we know exactly how harmful or how beneficial it is.
Right.
We're just kind of speculating and latching on to the quotes.
Yeah. So I would say, I'm not saying early specialization is good or bad. There's not enough research out there. I'm not an expert.
You're saying let's slow down on the hate.
Exactly. I'm saying why is it the bad guy when we have very little kind of empirical evidence actually saying that it's so bad for you. There is definitely some evidence out there, but there is also studies coming out now that are saying you're just as likely to experience overuse injuries whether you're specializing or not, or that it's not necessarily linked. I know someone's dissertation is coming out and it's saying that it's environment that's much more important than whether you're specializing or not. It's whether you're enjoying yourself, and that's not related necessarily to early specialization. So there's definitely stuff coming out saying there's definitely a discussion kind of starting that early specialization may not be kind of as bad as we've made it out to be, but it's definitely painted, like you said in that title, like it breaks children, and like I don't think we can say that.
Yeah, it's like just give it a rest.
Like,
relax a little.
Yeah, I'm not saying anyone's right or wrong. I'm not saying. I mean, don't ask me if you're a parent what your child should do. I'm saying we don't know the answers to that. And so I think the best you could do is just make sure that your kid's having fun. I mean, if they love hockey, is it more harmful to say, no, you have to go play soccer even though you hate it because early specialization is bad for you? Right? Like,
it doesn't also depend on the kid. And also when they're diversifying, and like in this age of like I feel bad saying it, but in this age of like psycho parents who all think that their kids are going to be the next Crosby.
Yeah.
If they put their kids in multiple sports, they're just gonna force them to specialize in multiple sports.
Yeah.
Like when you put your kid in soccer, hockey, and volleyball, if you're that type of parent, which I would assume that that's the vast majority of parents, sport parents.
Yeah.
Are they really going to tell their kids like, hey, the point of this sampling is that you can increase your physical literacy and be exposed to different skills? No, they're going to be like, you're making it out of one of these three sports, so go try your hardest.
Yeah, now we have a 1 in 3 chance of you getting that college scholarship to the States because you're playing 3 sports at an elite level rather than one. So it's,
Yeah. So, okay, so my question is, are we really like advising against early specialization because it's bad, or because we know that diversifying is good? Because there's a difference.
There is, and I would say we can't say diversifying is good. There's, I would say, I mean, again, I'm no expert, but there's no research really looking at the benefits of multi-sport participation. There is suggestions of, transfer. You can get better in your sport because the spatial awareness you need in basketball is similar to the spatial awareness you need in hockey or something like that. And so you can kind of transfer those skills over. So from a tactical or technical skill standpoint, there's potential there. But from a psychological, social, emotional standpoint, there's, I'd say, almost no evidence saying that multi-sport is the way to go. It's basically what we've done is taken the idea that if early specialization is bad, then multi-sport has to be good. And there's zero out there that really supports that.
That's true. And also, I think, don't we have to ask ourselves, well, what's the point of sport participation to begin with before we choose? Like, if you're a parent and listen, like, if you want your kid to make it, to be a professional athlete, like, I'm not, like, I don't, when I say psycho parents, I don't mean like, oh, if you want your kid to succeed in sport, therefore you're psycho. No. It's if you're abusive and you take it to the extreme levels, of course.
Yeah.
But if the point of sport participation is to make it to the elite level, then you're going to have to consider your options differently than if you're just enrolling your kid to have them enjoy sport.
Absolutely. It's a completely individualized, I'd say, decision that we're kind of forcing people as to make a group decision. We're saying early specialization is bad, but maybe for a small percentage of the population, early specialization is exactly what they need, and that's how they're going to be the most well-adjusted, happiest, successful kid that they can be is by playing that one sport that they love as much as they can.
Right.
And so I think it's potentially harmful to turn around to that child and say, no, you can't do that. You also have to play soccer and basketball because early specialization is bad for you. And I think it's 100% individualized, and you need to take a step back and say, well, why am I putting my child in sport? And once you have that can kind of guide your decision a little more. And even if it is to become an elite level, just because you specialize at 6 doesn't necessarily guarantee that you're going to become an NHL player.
Right.
There is evidence out there saying that early specialization is not actually the way you become an elite athlete, and you're just as likely if you play many different sports.
That's true. So has there been like research looking at comparing diversifying to specializing and saying which one offers the best way or the best path to like being a pro?
There's definitely retrospective. So they get people who are pros now and say, what did you do? And I mean, I think one of the studies was 46% had sampled. So you can look at it either way. You can say, well, 46%, that's a pretty high number. Or you can look at it and say, well, that's not even half. Right. So it depends. There is definitely research coming out that's saying it's not required to become an elite. But there's also people saying, well, early specialization is a kind of a booming trend right now. And the reason you're not seeing this is because you're interviewing people from 40 years ago when early specialization wasn't really happening. So obviously you're not going to see a trend of people specializing early. And so give it 20 years and do the same retrospective looking back and what did you do? You're going to see way more children who said, no, I played hockey 24/7.
Right. So do you think that's the case? Do you think more kids are specializing these days or diversifying? Because on one hand, like you said, you have parents like the ones you interact with and they say, oh, my kid has to play a lot of sports.
Yeah.
But then also you have a lot of parents who are like, no, my kid's sticking to one sport because this is how, he's going to make it.
Yeah.
What do you think, if you were to estimate, and of course it's only an estimation.
Yeah, complete guess. I don't know. It's hard to say. I would say probably the children who are specializing are doing it to more of an extreme. But then I would say the vast majority are playing many different sports. And I know we've kind of bounced around the topic of multi-sport specialization and how that's completely missed when we divide it into you're an early specializer or you're a diversifier. Well, what about those kids who are specializing in 2 or 3 sports? Because it is happening. They're dedicating, 5 hours a week to this and 5 hours a week to that. And so they're actually spending more time in 2 sports individually than one child playing one sport sometimes. And so we're seeing that. So I think there's a lot more going on than just early specializers and diversifiers.
So do you think like if a parent was listening or a coach or anything and they hear all those harmful things about early specialization, how would you want them to interpret all of that? How do you want them to approach all these findings? I think you need to kind of take it all with a grain of salt and understand within the research, we don't even have a definition of early specialization. So before you're thinking of whether it's good or bad, you have to figure out what it is. And so that's kind of what my research is really focusing on is like, well, let's come up with a definition of early specialization. And then once we have that, we can go into whether it's harmful or beneficial or what children should be doing. So I think as a coach, you need to step back and say, well, what aspects of early specialization may be harmful? And if it is overtraining and like intensity of training, well, you can easily manage that from a coaching perspective, right? And you can still have a kid playing one sport and not getting injured because you're training them properly and diversifying the training. Right.
So I think that would be something for coaches to consider. Again, I don't think you can say either way, whether children should specialize or diversify. It's a completely individualized decision. And I think if you see a child is unhappy in the sport that they're playing, maybe talk to them about why and see, is it they're doing too much or is it they just don't like the sport in general? Like,
right.
Sometimes you just don't like playing something, not because you're doing too much of it. Maybe you just don't like it.
Yeah, you just don't enjoy the sport.
So
yeah, I've seen it a lot in kids. Like sometimes when I tutor kids in elementary school or even early high school, and they come to me in the afternoon when I'm teaching them, and they're absolutely dead. I'm like, oh, what's wrong? Like a rough day at school? He's like, no, well, I woke up at 6 for soccer practice and then went to school, and I actually just came back from hockey practice after.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, well, at least maybe, it'll go home and take a nap or something. He's like, no, I got basketball at night.
Yeah.
I'm like, oh, great.
Yeah.
Well, you're just going to burn out in like 2 years max.
Exactly. And so that's the whole problem with like this multi-sport thing is you're just completely overscheduling kids. And I think the kind of main, when you go back to the very beginning, what they were trying to get at by this sampling was like, do things for fun and enjoyment, and it can be unstructured. Like just let your kid go play shinny with their friends, and like you don't need to, it doesn't have to be organized sport. It doesn't have to be structured. It doesn't have to be 5 times a week, and your kids can still get the benefits of it. And I think if that's part of the problem is this like overscheduled kind of generation that you're seeing at a young age, where if they're participating in something, it has to be adult-led, structured, supervised practice, and I don't think that's the case.
Kids are way too overscheduled these days.
Oh yeah,
it's a lot different than when we were growing up.
I think so.
And like we're not like, the gap between us and the kids isn't even that big.
No,
but it just seems like it's like their experiences are a lot different than ours.
Yeah,
you know what I mean. Like the kids I see are just insanely overscheduled with school, with everything, and it's like, well, are you gonna be, like what are you getting out of it at the end?
Yeah.
Right? Like the chance of making it to the pros is less than 2%.
Yep.
So is that what you're hoping for? Are you just hoping for a college scholarship?
Yeah.
Are you trying for an education? Like at the end, what are you getting?
Yeah.
I don't know. I don't know if they're getting much.
No, I know. And I think the problem with overscheduling is like kids aren't necessarily having fun anymore. Like what you described, it goes from this to this to this to this. Well, where's the time for him to just like relax and have fun with his friends? And like obviously sport participation, there's benefits of that. We're seeing that. But I just think this need to have like an adult supervised structured sport activity all the time is kind of the problem. And what do you think is more likely to lead to burnout? You know, a kid playing hockey once a week and that's considered early specialization, or a kid playing 3 different sports and, like you said, waking up at 6 a.m. for one sport and not coming home till 10 o'clock because of the other sports. And I think that's more likely to lead to burnout, if anything. But
right, because when we advocate for diversifying and playing multiple sports, well, in the world we live in, especially in Canada, it's like if you're a child, the chances are if you're playing sport, it's organized sport.
Yeah.
Right? You're not
100%.
just kind of kicking the ball around with your friends. You could, of course, but like if you're going to sample, chances are it's going to be organized.
Right.
And so where's the benefit in that?
Yeah.
Now you're just putting your kids in more structured and more...
and more training and more psychological stress that comes along with playing at an elite level. And so that's why I think we need to be cautious in advertising and advocating for multi-sport, especially when the message has kind of been lost. Like, sure, get your kid playing many different sports, but recreationally and for fun, not get your kid playing 5 sports at an elite level.
Right.
Because that's kind of where the pendulum has swung, is right. We said early specialization is bad. And so instead of kind of finding this middle ground that I think is needed, people swung way too far and they went, okay, you can't play one sport, you can play 5 sports. But you have to be good at all of them and you have to dedicate your time and energy and training. And so.
Right. What factor do you think Malcolm Gladwell's 10,000 hour rule has played into all of this?
I think he was definitely a contributing factor in this early specialization. I mean, within our lab, we've definitely talked about the issues with Malcolm Gladwell's book, but he grossly oversimplified a concept.
Right.
A concept in musicians that wasn't even applied to sport, and basically said, if you want to be an expert, do this for 10,000 hours. So then the thought process was, well, the sooner I start, the sooner I'll get to 10,000 hours, the sooner I'll be a pro. Right. So I think it's definitely contributed to the early specialization debate. And I know I was at like a family function and I heard some of my cousins talking about, like, when they heard what I did, talking about Malcolm Gladwell and Outliers, and I just had to kind of bite my tongue. And it was a good book. And, you know, meanwhile, I think it's a huge cause of a lot of the early specialization.
Right. And that's the thing about it, is like, it was based on musicians. They were violinists, I think. Yeah. And then everyone just took it and applied it to everything. Yeah. And then even though there's been a lot of research since then showing, like, no, you don't need 10,000 hour rule. Actually, sometimes it takes 2,000 hours. It depends on a lot of things. Depends on you, depends on the growth of the sport, on many things, funding. But for some reason, that's stuck around, and I think it continues to be predominant.
Yeah, for sure.
Yeah. I don't know. I think someone just needs to write a book on the opposite.
The problem with the 10,000 hours theory.
Because I feel like if you don't put it in like a quote or like a catchphrase, like 10,000 hour rule. Yeah. Then it's not going to stick around. Yeah. Even though it's true.
That's the problem, right? People aren't reading the research. So we need that kind of like knowledge mobilization, we call it, or like dissemination to be like, no, the research is actually saying 10,000 hours is not the baseline. It's so much more context specific than that. And we need a catchy way of packaging that and sending it out to the masses.
That's not on people.
No, for sure.
It's our fault.
Yeah,
because I mean, like, look at, like, there's so much good research going, and that's kind of why I started this show, is because, like, I want to get that out there. Yeah. Because if we just rely on ourselves as researchers for people to hear our what we have to say, it's never going to get out. Yeah,
come read my boring 20-page jargon-filled study.
Yeah, hey, come pay $55 for my paper. Yeah. On the journal of whatever.
Yeah. No, I think that's why what you're doing with this is really important, because you're getting people kind of who are on the ground doing the research to come and put it in practical terms. Like, how does this relate to everyone else?
Yeah. And there's a lot of people listening too. There's like over 7. So it's blowing up.
It is.
Yeah.
I mean, I think you had like 10 the other day. I was like, whoa.
Yeah. I might hit 11 after this one. Yeah, I might hit 11 actually.
First female.
First female, 2019. Things are getting going. So it's good.
Exactly.
So moving back a bit to diversifying. If you had a child, theoretically speaking, how would you approach this thing? Because you've played sports your entire life. Yep. You come from a family who all play sports, coaches, all that. Yep. How would you approach this?
That's a great question, and I've definitely wondered that. Yeah. I mean, studying elite sport, the more we study it, the more I'm like, I would never put my child through this. It's it's not a life. It's not a nice life to live. It's way better to play recreationally and have friends and go from there. So that's kind of one thing. So I think that makes the decision a little easier, because what's the point in specializing if you're not planning on becoming an elite athlete?
But what if you are?
But what if you are?
Like, if my kid's not an elite athlete, I might have to get rid of him. I might have to disown him.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I definitely think it's an individualized, and sure, at like 4 years old, you're picking the sports you want your kids to play, and I'd probably put them in hockey and basketball because those were my favorites, and you kind of see what they like. But I think once they're old enough to kind of have a voice from themselves, around 6 or 7, do you want to play this? Do you like playing this? Do you like going every Tuesday to play basketball? No? Okay, well, what are we going to do? And then I think you just kind of let their skills dictate what you do. If they potentially have a chance of becoming elite, great. If they want to pursue that, great. What do we do to kind of pursue that? But I don't think you need to force it. You going and saying your child better be elite or else.
Better.
Yeah. Not harmful at all.
Or he's not my child.
Yeah.
But it's crazy, especially when you look at the stats and how likely you are to make it to the pros.
Yeah. Why would you try?
I mean, I think it's 2%, and that's not accounting for international players. I think that's only for North American.
Yeah.
Like, I think last time I read it, like the North American kid has a 2% chance of making it.
Yeah.
And then when you account for all the international players coming from Europe and South America and all that, the chance decreases a bit more.
Oh, yeah.
And so you have to really approach it in that sense. Like, my kid has a 98% chance he's
failing.
Not making it. So let's approach this in the with the least harm possible.
And I think that's also something that kind of needs to get out there to the parents. I mean, you talk to any any parent whose child plays hockey, for example, they all think their kid's next Crosby going to the NHL, no problem. And so I think that idea of like realism needs to come in, and it does need to be out there more like, no, your chances of making it are less than 2%. Let's kind of be realistic here. Yeah. How many kids is that, not just like within the area, like on the team? What is the chance of just being the best player on your team, and then kind of go from there? And I think if parents were more realistic about what the outcome is going to be for their kid, it would probably be a lot easier to make decisions, and we probably wouldn't see as much early specialization, because everyone would just be doing it for fun.
Yeah.
But I also think that's pretty idealistic, and people are competitive and they always want their kid to be the best, and you can tell them a million times you have a less than 2% chance of making it, and they're going to say, okay, well, I'm going to be that 2%. So,
like, one of my favorite questions that athletes get asked sometimes in interviews is like, when did you know that you really have a shot at becoming an elite athlete?
Yeah.
And what I noticed, and this is of course anecdotal, but like, what I've noticed is none of them said, oh, when I was like 10, when I was 9.
No.
It's always like, like around high school, when I was finishing high school, I kind of...
Yeah, like, when I made the junior national team, I had an idea that I might have a shot, kind of thing.
And so, like, these are pro athletes who made it to the top of the top levels. Yeah. And they're telling you they didn't even know that they were capable of doing this until they were that old.
Yeah.
But we're saying to 4 or 5-year-olds, no, you're going to be.
Yeah.
If you're not going to listen to the pros, who are you going to listen to?
Yeah. No, and I think you could get into a whole other debate on like talent identification and how you know whether your kid's actually going to make it. And we don't know that. You have no way of knowing 6 years old little Johnny's going to be in the NHL or not. I mean, you might have a feeling. Sure, they might have some innate skills in them that you think, okay, this could work. But
and there's some prodigies, of course.
Yeah, of course.
These are like very rare, and that's why they're called prodigies, because they don't come often.
Yeah.
So
do you change your entire training schedule around that? Is that as soon as you see like a tiny bit of skill in your 6-year-old, are you supposed to force them to specialize and put all their eggs in one basket and think that they're going to be elite in one sport and overtrain in that sport? Like, I don't know. It doesn't make sense to me.
And it does seem like we don't know enough about the physiology of specialization itself.
Yeah.
Right? Like, of course, field of physiology is really massive, and like we know a lot about injuries, but when it comes to this particular area, it's kind of niche. Like, when you're specializing, what should you avoid? How old you should be when you're doing this and that? We don't know any of this. Yeah,
and there's definitely I'd say small group of researchers kind of pushing the field in sports medicine, especially, that is pushing this whole overuse injury. And like, not to get too technical, but when you look at their sport specialization scale and what they actually use to identify specialization, it misses everything we talked about before. If you're recreational, you're going to be compared just the same as if you're an elite athlete, or, you know, if you're training 10 hours a week, you're the same degree of specialization as someone training 2 hours a week, because of the 3 questions that they ask, essentially, they give you a low, moderate, or high specialization score based off of 3 questions. And I'd say the 3 questions that they use are not the best indicators of what early specialization is.
It's not valid. Like
I would argue it's not valid.
Right.
And it hasn't never been validated, but people kind of latched onto it and have used it consistently. And I mean, my biggest problem with it is they're talking about specialization, but they never talk about early specialization. Nowhere in the questionnaire does it ask like how old you are or what age you specialized. It's 3 questions. Did you quit other sports to focus on one sport? Do you participate, I think, more than 8 months per year? And then do you focus on only one sport? Those are the 3. Right. Those are the 3 questions. How does that determine whether you're an early specializer or not? Right. I don't know. There's lots of problems there.
It's really on the surface kind of stuff.
Yeah. Right. And I mean, if you're not even asking how old they are, how are we saying early specialization is a bad thing? Maybe it's just specialization in general. Well, that's a whole other can of worms to open.
What was I going to ask you?
This will be cut out.
Yeah. This will definitely be edited.
This will be edited.
No, but what I was gonna say is, when we're talking about kind of the hours you have to put in and all that, I think that's still the predominant way of thinking in today's society. And it's like, well, when is my kid gonna get his hours in? Yeah. And that's the problem. But do you think that eventually, over time, and this is what I was going to actually ask you. What I just said before, that was all bullshit. This is filler.
Okay, start again.
Yeah. Okay, this is what I'm going to ask you.
Okay.
I'm such a pro. Do you think eventually we will reach a time where people will actually pay attention to both sides of the argument? And I'm talking about people in the mainstream media, not within research. Yeah. Like, do you think the clarity will be out there? People will start to pay attention to both sides of the argument? Or do you think we're going to stick with the 10,000 hours versus no, you have to sample a lot. Yeah. And there's no healthy medium.
I would love to say that I think we will get to a healthy medium. I don't think it's any time in the near future. And I think there's always going to be those parents that don't listen and they're like, I don't care what you say. I know that if I put him in 10 hours of hockey a week, he's going to make it in the NHL. And I put in 10 hours a week and I made it to the NCAA or whatever. And they're going to take their own evidence and ignore it. I'm also not sure if the media would ever jump on the idea that early specialization is okay. I don't really know kind of what the agenda would be. I guess the more kids participating in more sport is always a good thing from like a bottom line perspective. Right. So I would like to say that we'd get to kind of a medium, but I don't know. I think it's hard for people to change something that they've heard for so long, right? Like, if you are saying early specialization is bad and they've latched onto this, I think it would take a lot more to convince them otherwise.
True.
Know.
Yeah.
Like changing people's beliefs, it's pretty difficult. It can be pretty difficult to do, right? Like,
yeah, that's true, especially when it's so ingrained in people.
Yeah.
Yeah, it's definitely true. But it's also, it's been done a lot of times. Especially when it comes to like diets. You ever notice that like bread and rice were always the go-to things, and like these are the things that you should be eating. Yeah. And like they're the most important thing in the
food guide.
In the food guide. And now it's like, no, we're moving away from it. And slowly but surely people are starting to realize.
But how long did that take?
Yeah, long
right?
Time.
Like that's like decades to make that change. And research has been saying that for like it's just been a small kind of camp quietly saying that, so it definitely took like more of a push. And I think that's what's going to happen is there's going to be a small camp of us saying, slow down here, early specialization, we can't say whether it's good or bad, let's look at it, and then who knows, maybe it is the worst thing your child can do, but and I'm not saying it's not, I'm just saying we can't say either way yet. And there needs to be more, so who knows, maybe 10 years from now when there's more research out on the subject, we can when I go to ladies league, the person will be like, oh, my kid's specializing because it's not as bad for you anymore. And I don't know.
Who knows? But the problem is that I was one, like, black or white. We never want the gray area.
Exactly.
But that's where we have to look.
Oh, 100%. Yeah, I think it's such an individualized decision. And I think that almost might be the better option, is not giving opinions either way and saying, you decide based on your child, based on his interests, based on his talents, based on whatever, what you want them to do. And why are we stepping in and telling you how to parent? I mean,
when you were growing up, did you play a lot of sports?
Yep. I played soccer, basketball, and hockey. And then I played like volleyball at school and like high school. And so I had this basically the same thing. I was playing basketball and hockey competitively, both of them. And it was like, okay, now around 14, you need to make a decision strictly from like a time perspective. Like I would go to a basketball tournament in London and then rush home for a playoff hockey game and be like dressing in the car. And so my parents were like, okay, we're not doing this. You need to pick one. But that happened when I was 14, when the time commitment was growing. And, you know, if you want to be an elite, 100% you have to specialize. You can't not.
Specialize at one point.
At one point, exactly. Yeah. That's the issue, is you do need to specialize to become elite. No one's arguing that. That's 100% agreed upon. You need to put in the hours. You need to train. But you don't have to do it at 6. You don't have to do it at 7. We don't really know when you have to do it, but we're saying the problem is doing it too soon.
Too soon, yeah.
And so, yeah, it was like 14. They were like, you need to make a decision. And so, yeah, I was definitely a multi-sport person.
Nice. But so my problem also with diversifying and playing a lot of sports is we always advocate for it. Not we, because I've never done any of that. Actually, I don't know much about the area in general. Yeah. But it's always advocated for. Put your kids in a lot of sports, let them have fun, all that. But where are the people going to get the money to do all that?
Yeah.
Like people are struggling to put their kids in one sport.
Yeah. And that's definitely something that's kind of been talked about, is from like a socioeconomic standpoint. If all this research does say that early specialization is bad and we mandate that kids have to play more than one sport, you're making sport inaccessible for a large percentage of the population, because they can't afford to put their kid in one sport. And they're being told they're a bad parent because their kid's only playing one sport, when that might not be the case. And so it's definitely an interesting kind of way of looking at things as well when you add the economic factor to it.
That's true. And there's a lot of barriers, like the average Canadian makes 35, I think, a year, something like that. And what do you want to put the kids in 2 or 3 sports?
Well, if you're looking at like an elite level sport, you could be dropping like $5,000 for your kids to be playing a sport, just because of gym costs and then registration costs, and you got to pay for.
You're driving all the time.
Yeah.
Gas.
Hotels if you're staying in. So yeah, it can definitely add up. So that's kind of another reason I say we have to be cautious when we're advocating for multi-sport, because you're making a percentage of the population feel like they're not good enough because their kid's only playing one sport, when we don't know if that's bad for them or not. Maybe that's exactly what they need.
Right. That's true. And there's no evidence that's going to make them more likely to be elite.
No.
So.
Yeah, it's definitely evidence challenging that, for sure.
So it's definitely a can of worms, like you said.
Yes.
Yeah. I don't envy you at all being involved in this, because I would just lose my mind all the time. You'd be yelling at people and.
Yeah.
Yeah.
I don't know. That's why you just got to kind of like see who you're talking to, and if they're open to talking about, well, why do you think your kid needs to play 5 sports? That's great. And if they're not, then you just kind of like, okay, yeah. If that's what you think, then we'll let you, I don't know, think that.
So like the main conclusion that like if people listening, they have kids in sport or their coaches themselves, is they should take it on a case-by-case basis, right? See what kind of training they're going through. Look more at the intensity and the volume rather than how many sports they're playing or not playing.
Yeah, I think that's important. And I think not necessarily just automatically saying early specialization is bad, my kid's not going to do it. I'm not advocating for it. I'm not advocating against it. I'm just saying we can't really say either way. And so, yeah, I think if you take it on a case-by-case basis and just, check in with your kid, if they're happy and enjoying it, then I don't really necessarily see the harm in that.
Yeah. God bless.
Playing one sport.
Do whatever you want, man. Just don't abuse your kids and and treat them like they're, Connor McDavid already.
Yeah.
It's crazy.
Oh my gosh, have you seen there's videos of like riots at hockey games between parents just because, so it's wild. So then that makes me think, that's the audience I'm talking to. Those are the people I'm trying to tell, your kid's not going to be elite, and you need to consider kind of their sport participation. And you I don't know, it's definitely scary to think that that's sometimes the audience that I'm trying to reach.
In Russia the other day, there was a fight between two hockey dads at the rink.
Yeah.
And one of them pulled a gun and shot the other one in the head.
Oh my God.
But the bullet just kind of grazed that guy's head, and so it didn't kill him.
Oh, okay.
So he lived.
Well, that's
But that's
what we're up against.
Yeah.
That's who you're trying to talk to and say, like, hold on a second, let's think here. And they definitely don't.
Yeah, put your gun away and then let's talk a little bit, and then maybe we can figure something out.
Exactly.
Yeah. I mean, I hope that's not going on in Canada. This does sound more like a cultural thing than anything else, than a hockey thing.
Yeah, for sure.
But yes, the parents out there they gotta be careful and don't overwork your kids. Don't overschedule them.
Yeah, I don't think there's anything wrong with letting your kid go play outside. I get there's safety concerns. So.
Well, did you hear about the kid? Sorry to interrupt, but did you hear the kid? I think it was in Canada. The parent that got their kid taken away because they let them walk home from school.
Yeah, I did hear about that because there was child endangerment or something like that.
Yeah.
And meanwhile, all our parents are like, I walked to school uphill both ways.
I know. I'm like, Mom, can you pick me up? She's like, no, walk, idiot. I'm like, all right.
Yeah.
So I just walked.
Yeah. No, that was definitely interesting. And I know, there is child safety concerns. And we're not saying, go let your kid play at the park at 9 o'clock at night by himself. That's exactly what I'm telling you to do. No, that's not what we're saying. But I don't think there's anything wrong with, bringing your kid to a field and letting them play soccer. And maybe you're the supervisor and you're not coaching. You're just watching to make sure there's no, pedophiles around.
Yeah.
But letting them play and have fun and decide the structure it the way they want to. I don't see anything wrong with that.
It's true. What were you going to say before? You probably forgot.
I forget.
Yeah, you probably forgot. Yeah. But I think that's the main point that maybe it's important to get across.
And obviously I'm not a parent and I'm not pretending that it's easy to make parenting decisions.
And full disclosure, I don't plan on being a parent ever. So don't take my advice with a grain of salt.
Don't listen to it at all.
Yeah. I can barely take care of myself.
Yeah, so I think I'm not saying it's easy, and I'm not criticizing parents. And I mean, we made jokes about psycho parents, and obviously we all know examples of parents who do take it a little too far. But I think, for the most part, if your kid's happy, there's nothing wrong with just kind of talking to them and letting them make the decision. And whatever decision you make, I think you just kind of have to be comfortable with it and just make sure that your kid's okay. And I mean, don't overcomplicate it too much.
Yeah.
I don't know.
And hey, I mean, if he makes it or she makes it,
I mean, and if they do, and you want to come, and you want to come tell me that it was multi-sport that did it or early specialization was the key, I'm more than open to talking about that kind of thing.
But then that would still be just a case-by-case basis again.
Yeah.
Your kid made it because he or she did this.
Yeah.
Now the kid might benefit differently.
Yeah, and I know watching this back, I'm going to realize that I contradict myself a million times. No, and sometimes I sound like I'm for it and against it, and I think the point is we don't know.
But exactly, that's the whole point of this, is not to say that, no, this is black or white. It's to say, before you take anyone's advice, consider both sides of the argument.
Exactly.
Because there's evidence for both.
Yeah.
And evidence for either option, sampling or specializing, is kind of shaky.
Yeah, and just kind of be aware that there is kind of this movement to reinvestigate early specialization. And I know there was an editorial released recently where the guy was like, my kid specializes and he's doing just fine, and I specialized and I'm doing just fine. And I think we need to look at it exactly on a case-by-case basis. And I think we need to get rid of titles like fear, greed, and broken dreams about early specialization. That's definitely not helping kind of bring things back to the middle in any way. So yeah,
that's true. You're calling out this guy who's on Vancouver Sun. I'm not calling him out. If you're listening, hey, give me a job.
Thanks for listening.
Give me a job, please.
Sorry.
But no, I agree. That's
I'm not calling him out necessarily. I just think those are really strong words.
Yeah.
For very little evidence, I would say.
Yeah, and that's probably not even the writer. Not even the author. It's probably just the.
No, you need a catchy title.
Yeah,
the editor in chief.
The editor was like, no, this is not gonna catch people's attention. Let's just title it this way. And we both know Veronica, who finished her PhD and now she's kind of in journalism, doing the same thing. And she submits posts.
Yeah.
And with titles, and they always edit them in a way to make it more
exciting and
appealing and polarizing. And they edit the titles all the time, and so
exactly. Yeah. No, I'm not. I'm just joking. I'm not attacking this journalist for his title, but even the claims he made in the article, they are pretty strong. And I mean, I don't want to get too much into the research, but the majority of it is based on commentaries and editorials and reviews that just cite the same, 5 to 10 studies over and over again. And no one's really adding that much more to the field. We've all just kind of latched onto the idea that it's bad and kind of ran with it. And I think popular media is doing that. And there was, I noticed recently on Twitter, a debate that kind of broke out between early specialization. And it gets pretty heated because people have their own opinions, but then they have their own stories of what worked for them and what didn't. And I'm on Twitter, but I personally haven't.
I hate Twitter.
I haven't jumped into it because it can get really personal. Some of the stuff, they ended up like attacking the person's like character, and I was like, hold on here, we're just talking about like sports.
I can't stand Twitter. I hate it so much, and like I'm on there because I feel like I have to.
Yeah. Because
everyone's on there.
Yeah, you got to promote the podcast.
Got to promote my of course. So I got over 20 followers, so I got to promote it. But Twitter is a cesspool. I hate it. But
it can be a place for good discussion.
Yeah.
But then the discussion can also go completely off the rails.
Yeah.
But I think it is important for academics to use Twitter in a way that kind of opens up the conversation. And I know Joe, our supervisor, after every class we had in about talent and skill, he would put out a question. What do you think about this? Or we had a great discussion in class about this. What are people's opinions? And you do get some responses.
Yeah, for sure.
Sometimes it is a helpful discussion, but then, sometimes it can go completely wrong.
I guess in a way too, Twitter, like, you can do what you can to kind of limit all that negativity and keep it just like what you want to get out of it. For example, I can only follow 7-8 people if that's all I want, and I can get the benefit out of it.
Yeah.
But a lot of times it's like you can't escape the I don't know. Yeah, the shitstorm. I guess, for lack of a better term.
No, that's true.
Anything else that you want to bring up? Anything you want to plug?
ESEPs?
ESEPs? No. Yeah, I can plug ESEPs. I got this conference going on.
We have a conference going on, Eastern Canada Sport and Exercise Psychology Symposium. York is hosting it this year. It'll be in Vaughan. You can check out the website. You can link it in the YouTube.
Yeah, I'll link it.
Link it in the box below. Some
random people who sign up.
Yeah, why not? Yeah. No, I think not even specific to early specialization. I guess the kind of like take home message is like just be skeptical of what you're reading and understand that there's two sides to every story. And just because one is kind of the loud one that's being promoted in the media doesn't necessarily mean it's right.
And it's all propaganda from the Soviets.
Exactly. We gotta be careful of that for sure.
So it always is. But thanks a lot for doing this. I really appreciate it.
It was
fun. This was fun.
Yeah, it was good.
Yeah, thanks a lot.
Thanks.